We're here because free speech is under attack. We're here because people are being convinced that socialism works. We're here because people are being judged guilty until proven innocent. We are fighting back with facts. This is not a safe zone, so buckle up, Buttercup. This is the raw, naked truth.
Another interest rate hike, mixed jobs report, GDP slowing. What's going on with the economy? It's all about the money on this episode of Raw Naked Truth. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin. And for this Wallet Watch segment, I'm joined by Chris Calandra of Elliott Wealth Management. Chris, how are you doing today?
I am excellent. Thanks for having me today.
It's always good having you, talking about what's going on in the markets, the economy, and for people's wallets. So we had quite a bit of news coming in over the past week, and it all seems to focus around a slowing economy.
Yes, the forecast for recession remains in place, although I think, Eric, the predictions we had some time ago about a deep, nasty recession seems to have declined quite a bit. Now, I think conventional wisdom says that we're going to have either very, very slow economic growth. The GDP numbers that were reported recently were pretty weak, although positive, so that's good. But we still are probably looking at a recession driven by the Fed's very aggressive interest rate hike cycle.
Yeah, then the Fed just raised another quarter point, but they also seem to indicate that they may be pausing interest rate hikes for a little while.
Yeah, it's an unusual environment, Eric. It's often said that when the Fed acts, especially aggressively, they're going to end up breaking something. And what they broke is a whole bunch of regional banks. We've had several notable bank failures that historically rank not as the largest. The largest bank failure was Washington Mutual back in 2008. But these recent bank failures were number 2, 3, and 4 on the largest bank failure list ever. The most recent failure was First Republic Bank. The first one, of course, was widely publicized, that being Silicon Valley Bank. So it's unusual because you have these bank failures, which is probably deflationary and probably giving the Fed some concerns over continuing to raise interest rates. However, one of the stated goals, and if you saw this, Eric, Fed Chairman Powell got on a prank call with somebody that was pretending to be Zelensky from Ukraine. And of course, he spoke, Powell did much more candidly than he does when he's in front of Congress or in front of the press. But he basically said that what they wanted to do was slow down the labor market. That's the only tool that they really knew how to use in this inflation system, was to slow economic growth and hurt the labor market. Well, the labor market is still pretty strong. So they're contemplating a pause in interest rates, yet they didn't really do what they set out to do in terms of slowing down the labor market. It slowed down maybe a touch, but it's still a pretty strong job market, historically speaking, and unemployment is near record lows over the last 40 or 50 years.
Yeah, unemployment is still at record lows. However, the job numbers that came out, while the April numbers did look good, both February and March were reduced. So there were fewer jobs created than actually announced in those job numbers. And we are starting to see a number of layoffs in industries. So it's really a very split job market.
It is. There are a lot of layoffs, especially in tech. There are tons and tons of job openings, yet you have the participation rate, the number of working age American adults in the workforce. Although it's improved some, it still has not recovered to pre-pandemic levels. So it's like a lot of things we talk about, Eric. It's kind of unusual, but I think you would agree that it's surprising that the labor market has held up as well as it has in the face of the most aggressive interest rate hike cycle the country's ever seen. The Fed has been very aggressive. So, you know, we live in unusual times, but all of this, of course, I know I am repeating myself from other Wallet Watch segments, is, you know, what we're dealing with is different. It's different because all of this came out of the unusual set of circumstances that were created by the pandemic, the economic shutdowns, and the government's response to both of those things. So, you know, none of this really kind of fits your classic standard playbook. It's very unusual times.
It is very unusual. You know, it's the Washington Post, not to get political about this, but the Washington Post just gave Joe Biden a bottomless Pinocchio because of the number of times he's repeated the lies about dropping the deficit and creating new jobs. And the fact of the matter is, we haven't really created new jobs. We've gotten jobs back that went away during the pandemic. And we didn't drop the deficit. We just stopped spending all of the pandemic era programs. So this is a unique situation because the economic downturn was completely self-inflicted to deal with the pandemic. It wasn't part of a natural cycle.
Agreed, 100%. It's not normal economic environment because of what the government did. And I think they've made a ton of mistakes. I believe you agree with that. But even if you believe they did the right things, we're still dealing with the repercussions of that. And the playbook is a little unreliable at this point because many of the things that brought us to this point are highly unusual and not natural. And you're right about the president. And let me point out that probably your next couple of Wallet Watch segments will begin to focus on this debt ceiling battle between the president and the Senate, which is controlled by the Democrats, but they have an important role to play, at least in theory, in this, and then the House Republicans. And this is something that will affect people's wallets because it has the potential to spook the markets if these these folks that govern us can't sort something out and avoid a debt default.
Yes, and of course, as we record this, Chuck Schumer, President Biden, Mitch McConnell, and Kevin McCarthy are scheduled to meet about the debt ceiling today. So we will see what happens. But, and you know, as long as you've brought up the debt ceiling, I think it's important to bring up what is actually going on, because there's been a lot of statements that really miscategorize what's going on with the debt ceiling. It's not simply a matter of allowing us to borrow more. Hitting the debt ceiling literally means we have maxed out the country's credit cards. And what President Biden has been insisting on is that they allow the country to get more credit cards to pay off the debt from the old credit cards, rather than actually doing anything about our spending. And that's where the Republicans are pushing back.
100% right. The debt ceiling was originally meant so that the government could confront the amount of debt that's being taken on and have a limit. And like a household, like a business, you want to honor at best, right? Honor that debt limit. And sometimes it might make sense to go over the debt limit, but it's not something that should be done willy-nilly, because taking on the types of debt this country has taken on can and will have negative repercussions. And so this is a very good debate. The idea, first and foremost, that President Biden is putting forth that this is not an appropriate discussion, that automatically the debt ceiling should just be lifted, I think is laughable. But that's not really the right term, Eric, because it's really, really dangerous. It's a good debate. Maybe the debt ceiling should be lifted because spending was approved by Congress and the president. But I think this is a really good debate. And I think, and I know you said we're not going to talk much politics, let me just say, I find it incredible in this country where the government is bringing in more tax revenue, bringing in more revenue than it ever has before, yet we can't figure out any ways to talk about ways we could make the government more efficient and do better with the money that they are charged with using on behalf of the American people. With such a huge budget, it's incredible that we can't have a debate on how we can't use that money better and maybe be better stewards of the money that they have. It's just nuts. This happens in America, in business and in households all the time, but a federal government, President Biden in particular, has no interest in even thinking about how you might be able to spend money better, maybe a little less, maybe more efficiently. It's nuts.
Well said. It's also important to point out that very shortly, the interest on the national debt is going to be the largest part of the American government's budget. So it does need to be looked at. And that's the raw naked truth. Thanks for being here, Chris. You can catch every episode of The Raw Naked Truth at xvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech. We'll see you next time.